Today we're going to be having an episode on Spanish linguistics, again, Castilian Spanish specifically, and we're going to be talking about a misconception that people often have with two consonants, B and V. And I'm saying this in English, B and V, or as in Spanish, respectively, they'd be B grande and B chica. Please remember that this is not the pronunciation that every single community uses. This is just the standard Spanish pronunciation that we'll be taking a look at, because of course, as in every language, there are dialects that may have some different methods of pronunciation, but we're going to be taking a look at the pronunciation that is used almost universally in Spain and Latin America. ¿Qué onda? Soy Sebastian y este podcast es Otomi. For all of my non-Spanish native speakers, this is Sebastian and I'm a high school student in the Bay Area. I've got the facts and the opinions. Join me as we discuss topics of society, culture, identity, education, and life. So once again, the pronunciation that we're going to be looking at today is considered to be the standard in Latin American Spanish and the Spanish spoken by people who live in Spain, Peninsular Spanish. And again, there are different languages that could be considered Spanish because there are multiple languages spoken in Spain, but we're talking about Castilian Spanish specifically. So you may be asking, why in the world is this relevant? And in order to understand that, I think I need to provide a little bit of my own context to the situation. So when I was little, when I'd call my grandparents, my abuelos, right, my abuelos, I'd call them abuelo and abuela. Now, if you hear that correctly, abuelo, I would pronounce it with a V, abuelo, abuela. But the word abuelo has a B in it, not a V. A V, as in the name Victor. It doesn't have a V. It had a B. So that was already, when I started learning the orthography of the Spanish language, I was like, hold on, this isn't right. And same thing would happen with other words like saber, to know. Tú sabes, I would say tú sabes, sabes, with a V, because when I was younger and I was learning Spanish, I only knew how to communicate orally, but I couldn't write or read very well. I could read, but not very well. So I didn't understand that those were B's that were in the language. If I were to spell it, I would probably spell it Saves back then. But now understanding that that's not necessarily the case, I have to reconsider that, and I had to say, you know what, I need to look deeper into the Spanish language and start to study it a little bit better, because my pronunciation might not be entirely correct. And that's what I did. I'd like to direct your attention to my comments in the introduction, where I said we'd be taking a look at B grande and B chica, which B grande is B and B chica is V. Now, the importance in noticing that is that the only distinguishing factor between those consonants is the word that follows. So you have B grande, big B, and then B chica, little b. Another way to pronounce B chica is V, which is another way to distinguish between B and V. That way you don't have to use the grande and the chica. So now this brings us to the main point of how you pronounce these two. They are both pronounced in the same way. You could exchange them in their position in a word and they'd be pronounced the same way. The basis upon which they are pronounced is in the context of the word in the sentence. That is what determines how they are pronounced. Now, the reason I say this is because there are two ways in which they can be pronounced. The B can be pronounced in two different ways, and the V can be pronounced in two different ways. Both of the letters share the same exact modes of pronunciation. The two varieties of pronunciation which I'm mentioning are shared by both of them. And both of these letters can be used in the same way. The only thing is you have to determine the way in which they are pronounced based on their position in a word. So we're going to start with the way the B and the V are pronounced in English. Now, the B in English is pronounced as a bilabial plosive, a voiced bilabial plosive. B. It's bilabial because both of your lips are touching. And it's a plosive because of that action, the p, up. That's a voiceless bilabial plosive. Now, when you voice it, which means you use your vocal cords to send vibrations, you go b. And that's what you have in English. And now this same exact phoneme exists in the Spanish language. Ba. So keep that into consideration. Now, the next one, we're going to be talking about the English V. And this V is also used in other Romance languages like French and Portuguese, V. But in Spanish, it's not used. This is called the labial dental fricative, a voice labial dental fricative. Now, the reason it is a labial dental is because it is your bottom lip touching your top teeth. Now, if you don't voice it, it sounds like an F. But when you voice it and you use your vocal cords, it sounds like a V. V. And that is how, in English and other languages like French, Portuguese, we use the V, but not in Spanish. In Spanish, the other phoneme that we used for the B and the V, or the B grande and the B chica, is the bilabial approximant. Now, this is a voiced bilabial approximant. And what happens is you're making somewhat of a sound similar to that of the V, except it's used by both of your lips. You're not using any teeth. Instead, it's your top and bottom lip coming very close together, but not touching all the way. So it's V. Now, when I say that, I'm not using any teeth, and my lips are not touching. My lips are extremely close to each other. That's why it's called an approximant. And I'm using the vibration in my voice to make that V sound. Notice how it's not a V, it's a V. And that is the voiced bilabial approximant that is used in Spanish as the other phoneme. And that is one that many non-native speakers struggle to pronounce because they don't realize it's there and they don't know how to pronounce it correctly. So now we've established that the B and the V in Spanish are pronounced in the same way. So we have to ask, when do we use which phoneme? When do we use the bilabial approximant or the voiced bilabial plosive? And now I'll be honest, the voiced bilabial approximant, which is not used in English, is much more common than the one that's used in English, the bilabial plosive. And the reason is, so the voiced bilabial plosive, the b, that one is used specifically after consonants like an M, or an N, you're saying to invent something, inventar, it has that b, inventar. And again, I said it's not as pronounced as in the English language where you go b, a book. Like if I say voy a ir does not sound like voy a ir, right? Now notice that when I used it in voy a ir, that it was at the beginning of a phrase. You're going to use it, usually they say use it at the beginning of words, at the beginning of words. Also notice that the word in which I use it, boy, starts with a V. That's where I tell you that you can use it in the same way. And the word buscar starts with a B. One starts with a V, one starts with a B, but use the same pronunciation. Same with inventar. There's a V there, but I pronounce it as you would basically pronounce the English B. Other examples are vaca, or cow, starts with a V, banco, which starts with a B, and vos, which starts with a V. Now we're going to be talking about the use of the voiced bilabial approximant, which is used usually when it is in the middle of two vowels. And when it's in the middle of two vowels, this can also entail a word that starts with the V or the B, but that is following a word that ends in a vowel. Now, words that exemplify this are, you could say, nuevo. Nuevo has a V in it, but it uses the bilabial approximant. Another one would be estaba. Estaba uses that bilabial approximant. However, it has a B in it. Nuevo and estaba use the same exact phoneme, but their letter is completely different. One of them is B grande and the other one is B chica. And for this pronunciation, remember there are some variations in that Americans who tend to be learning Spanish, actually most people of other Romance languages learning Spanish, so individuals who speak Portuguese, French, or Germanic languages like English, when they're learning Spanish, they distinguish between the B and the V specifically, and they will pronounce the V as a voiced labiodental fricative, and the B in its own voiced bilabial plosive manner. And that's incorrect. That's not really the way it's supposed to be pronounced. Now, again, languages are always evolving, and some people don't agree with saying correct or incorrect. But in the end, when you're talking about standard Spanish and what is used in virtually every single country that is Spanish speaking, there is a distinction between them. Now, notice how the bilabial approximant of it does require for your lips to get close to each other. And sometimes in music, if you listen to it, I think this occurred in the song Despacito, where sometimes when musicians are singing and they're smiling a lot, they'll pronounce that approximant as a fricative. So V. They might say estaba because they're smiling and they can't really get their lips close enough. So they'll say estaba, and they're touching their top teeth with their bottom lip. But that's something that occurs. And there was also a study, I believe, in Puerto Rico where they saw that a good number of the people pronounced it with a V, with a labiodental fricative, voiced labiodental fricative, instead of the approximant, which then makes it sound like sabes, abuelo. People were pronouncing it that way. And that's why I'm saying there are always distinctions, even within dialects of native speaking countries, where people pronounce it certain ways. And I'd say a significant other example would be the Chicano population of the US that has had a significant influence in the English language that they're learning in their education system as they're raised in the United States. Chicanos tend to also use, they tend to use the V sound as well, because a lot of the time also they're learning the words from what they hear rather than what they're writing, similar to what I experienced, because I didn't really have a formal education of Spanish. I was just taught by my parents really to speak it, maybe to read it a little bit. And then now I've been furthering my studies of the language with writing and reading novels, things like that. So yeah, even here in the US, we do have people who will say, instead of inventar, they'll say inventar, or they'll say yo voy a la tienda. It's yo voy. All right, so what may be interesting to many is the history of how this occurred. Because as I said previously, the majority of Romance languages do pronounce the B and the V in distinct manners. And this is kind of a phenomenon that is unique to Spanish. And So what really happened was around the age of discovery, changes came to the language in that many of the lower class individuals of society, or people who didn't have as much of a formal education, with their writing, the orthographic changes came about because of mistakes that were made. And these mistakes were caused by a lack of acknowledgement of the difference between the B and the V. Now, there was someone who wrote the V and the B are distinct and they should sound differently because of the fact that they're orthographically spelled differently. And this was, I believe, someone who wrote this was in around that age of discovery, and they said the upper class makes the distinction. But this should be an example to you of how things have changed. The old way of spelling the words estaba and deber were with V's instead of B's. So it was estava and dever, similar to how it's spelled in Portuguese. So I think that's really interesting how, due to the common orthographic mistakes that were being made by other individuals, a change came about to the way things were spelled. So there's a little bit of linguistic history to that. I hope you really enjoyed this episode. I wanted to keep it short, but also informative and interesting. I'll see you guys next time on Otomi.